Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today, things are getting a little weird. We're looking at climate change, but focusing on cows, their burps, and a vaccine.
You're hearing that right. A vaccine for cows.
Hmm.
And as strange as it sounds, the science is really interesting.
We've got research here on this company, ArkeaBio, and their vaccine that's supposed to reduce methane emissions from livestock. But before we get into all that, why is this such a big deal? A vaccine for cow burps, really?
Well, livestock, especially their methane, make up a huge amount of greenhouse gases globally. We're talking like the same impact as every car on the planet.
Wait, are you serious? Cow burps are that bad?
It's true. To give you an idea, it's even more than all the cement production in the world and 4 times worse than the entire airline industry.
Wow, okay. I'm adding cow burps to my list of climate villains. So how does a vaccine even begin to fix something that big? That's where it kind of sounds like we're getting into sci-fi territory.
It's all about where the problem starts. Those microbes that live in a cow's stomach, specifically their rumen, these little guys called methanogens, they're the ones making all that methane. They're just doing their thing, being part of the cow's digestion. But all that methane is a problem.
So if we can stop those methanogens, then we can really cut down on methane. But how do you even make a vaccine for that?
ArkeaBio has a really cool approach. Their vaccine basically teaches the cow's own immune system to fight off these methane-making microbes.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if I'm getting this. This vaccine, it makes the cow's body produce antibodies that attack those gassy bacteria.
That's exactly it. And the really amazing part is that it's super targeted. It only goes after those methanogens without messing up the other good microbes in the cow's rumen.
So it's not wiping out all the bacteria, which would probably be really bad for the cow. It's more like a special ops team going in to deal with those methane makers.
That's a great way to put it. And this isn't just some crazy idea. ArkeaBio's gotten investment from some big names, even Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Ventures Fund. And that's all about climate change solutions.
Yeah, that's really impressive. When I saw Bill Gates was involved, I knew this had to be legit. He's not just throwing money at any idea. What kind of impact are we talking about if this thing works?
It could be huge.
Yeah.
I mean, we could be looking at drastically cutting down methane from livestock farming around the world. It could buy us some much-needed time to deal with climate change.
Okay, so now we're talking about changing the world. This is where it gets really interesting. But I'm guessing making a vaccine like this isn't easy, right?
You're right. It's definitely complex. It has to be super precise so it doesn't harm the good microbes. And obviously, it has to work well and last long enough that farmers aren't vaccinating their herds all the time.
That sounds like a tough job. And this isn't even the only solution out there, is it? I thought there were other companies working on this methane problem.
There are. There are actually quite a few other interesting solutions in development. For example, some companies are working on special feed additives that reduce the amount of methane produced.
Oh yeah, like adding seaweed to their food? I read something about that. There are so many incredible innovations happening right now.
You're right, and it's not just seaweed. Researchers are looking at something called kombucha, which is, well, pretty much what it sounds like, kombucha for cows.
Kombucha! Seriously! I have to hear more about that, but I'm sure feed additives aren't the only thing they're trying. What else is out there?
Beyond feed, there are even companies developing tech that can capture methane right from the farm. These systems would trap and neutralize the methane before it even gets into the atmosphere.
Wow, so we've got special diets, methane capturing tech. Is there anything else? What's next?
Get this. They're working on wearable devices for cows to track their emissions in real time.
Hold on, wearable tech for cows. That's amazing. This whole field is blowing my mind. Who knew there were so many options?
It's pretty wild. It just goes to show that solutions can come from anywhere, and sometimes tackling a huge problem like this requires thinking outside the box. Or, I guess in this case, outside the barn.
I have to admit, I was a little skeptical at first, but kombucha. Methane monitoring wearables for cows, you've got my attention.
It is pretty remarkable. But for now, let's get back to ArkeaBio and their vaccine. We've talked about the potential, but I want to really break down how it works in the cow's digestive system.
Exactly. It's one thing to talk about antibodies and targeting microbes, but how does it actually work? What's step one?
It all starts with finding the right targets within the cow's rumen microbiome.
So that's the first part of their stomach, right? Where all those methanogens are.
That's the one. It's about pinpointing the exact microbes that are making all that methane.
This is where it gets really interesting, right? It's not just any bacteria.
Absolutely not. It's way more complicated than that. Remember we talked about making sure the vaccine doesn't hurt the good microbes? That's the really tricky part. ArkeaBio is constantly refining its approach. doing more research, and making sure they hit the right targets. Because here's the thing, those microbial communities, they're always changing. Their diet, the seasons, even where the cow lives, can change what those microbes look like.
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. And that's why what ArkeaBio is doing is so impressive. It's not a one-and-done vaccine. They're looking at all the data from their research, from databases, even just watching what's happening in the field, all to stay ahead of those changes and adapt their vaccine as needed.
That's amazing. So they're basically making a vaccine that changes along with the microbial communities.
That's it. But figuring out those targets is only the first step. Once they know exactly what they're going after, then they can actually start building the vaccine itself.
Okay, so they know which methanogens they want to target. How do they build a vaccine that teaches the cow's immune system to go after them?
Well, that's where it gets really, really cool. They take all that knowledge, the methanogen targets, how the rumen's immune system works, everything they see happening in the field, and use it to develop the most effective vaccine possible.
So it's not as simple as just mixing a few things together and calling it a day.
Oh, definitely not. It's a ton of trial and error, testing different versions and seeing how well they work, both in the lab and with real cows.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
They need to keep testing and tweaking to make sure they're hitting those targets as effectively as possible. So once they have this vaccine, how does it actually work inside the cow? I vaguely remember learning about antibodies in biology.
You're on the right track. When cow gets this vaccine, its immune system recognizes the methanogens as a threat.
So it's basically raising the alarm, telling the cow's body to watch out for these methanogens.
Exactly. And once that alarm is going off, the cow's immune system kicks into gear and starts making antibodies that specifically target those methanogens.
So the cow is being trained to fight off those bacteria on its own. It's incredible how our bodies work. But how do those antibodies get to those methanogens? They're deep inside the cow, right?
Another good question. It all comes down to delivery. The cow's saliva, which is now full of these antibodies, acts like a little transportation system, carrying them right into the rumen where all the methane is being made.
Wow, so the antibodies go straight to the source. That's so cool. So what happens then? Do those antibodies just destroy all the methanogens?
Not quite. Remember, we don't want to get rid of all the methanogens, just get their numbers under control so they produce way less methane. The antibodies basically latch onto the methanogens and stop them from producing methane as much. It's all about restoring balance in the rumen.
So less like wiping them out and more like disarming them.
Exactly. And there's another benefit to this approach too. Remember we talked about how making methane uses up energy that the cow could be using? Well, when there are fewer active methanogens, the cow gets to keep more of that energy from its food.
So less methane A&D, healthier, more productive cows. That's amazing.
That's the idea. It's a great example of how smart solutions can be good for both the environment and agriculture.
This is truly revolutionary stuff. But like we said before, this is really complicated, and I'm guessing there are still some challenges before this vaccine is ready for prime time. What are some of the roadblocks ArkeaBio has to overcome to bring this to market?
Well, like any new technology, especially in agriculture, there are regulations to deal with. They have to prove to regulators that this vaccine is safe, that it works, and that it won't cause other problems for the environment or people.
Right, because the last thing anyone wants is to fix one problem and accidentally create a new one.
Exactly. That process is important, but it takes time. And that's not the only challenge. Another big one is being able to scale up. To really make a dent in global methane emissions, they'll need to make and distribute massive amounts of this vaccine.
That's a lot. Even if they can do that, I imagine getting farmers all over the world to adopt a whole new technology is another challenge.
You're absolutely right. Farmers are running businesses, and they need to know that an investment is worth it.
So it's not just about the science, it's about the economics, too.
Exactly. They have to show that this vaccine will either save farmers money, make their livestock healthier and more productive, or appeal to consumers who are looking for sustainable food.
It sounds like there's still a lot to think about, even with such a promising solution.
You're right, it's not a quick fix, but it's a huge step in the right direction. And the really exciting thing is that this is just one of many incredible things happening in sustainable food production.
Okay, now I need to hear about these other innovations. You said this was just the tip of the iceberg, so what else should we be paying attention to?
So you want to know how they actually create a vaccine for something as complex and ever-changing as a cow's rumen, huh?
It's pretty mind-blowing. Pinpointing these methanogens with such accuracy is impressive, but that how part is still a bit fuzzy for me. It feels like, I don't know, developing a vaccine for a moving target in a dark room.
That's a great way to put it, and it gets right to the core of ArkeaBio's approach. They're using some seriously powerful tech microbiological analysis, bioinformatics, to constantly refine their understanding of these methanogens.
Okay, time for a quick breakdown. Those terms sound impressive, but what do they actually mean?
Sure. Think of microbiological analysis as like diving deep into the microscopic world inside the cow's rumen. They're looking at all the different microbes, their populations, how they interact with each other. It's like they're taking a census of this tiny community.
Makes sense. But how do they even analyze something so small, and how do they pick out the methanogens from the crowd?
And that's where bioinformatics comes in. It's basically using computer science and statistics to analyze huge amounts of biological data. Imagine they sequence the DNA of these microbes and then use these super complex algorithms to pinpoint the genes responsible for methane production. They're building these massive databases to track how these microbes evolve over time.
So it's like they're microbial detectives gathering evidence and building a case against those methane-producing culprits.
Exactly. And here's the really cool part. Remember how we were talking about those microbial communities always changing? Well, ArkeaBio is using all of this data, their research, global databases, field observations, you name it, to stay ahead of those changes. They can adapt their vaccine targets as needed.
That's incredible. They've created a dynamic vaccine that evolves alongside these microbial communities.
You got it. But, of course, identifying the targets is just the first step. Once they have a good understanding of their target, they can move on to actually developing the vaccine itself.
Okay, so they've identified the methanogens. What's next? How do they actually create a vaccine that can train the cow's immune system to go after them?
This is where things get really fascinating. They take all of that knowledge, the specific methanogens to target, the intricate workings of the rumen's immune system, and even the real-world data, and they use it to create the most effective vaccine formulation.
So it's more involved than just throwing some ingredients together.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of trial and error. They test different formulations, analyzing their effectiveness in the lab and out in the field with real cows.
That makes sense. They're constantly refining their approach to make sure they're as precise as possible. But I'm curious, once they have this vaccine, how does it actually work inside the cow? I vaguely remember something about antibodies from biology class.
You're on the right track. Once they vaccinate a cow, the cow's immune system recognizes those methanogens introduced by the vaccine as a threat.
So the vaccine is essentially sounding the alarm for the cow's immune system, saying, hey, these methanogens are the bad guys.
Exactly. It's like ringing the alarm bell. And once that happens, the cow's immune system leaps into action, producing antibodies specifically designed to target those methanogens.
So the cow is trained to fight off those gassy bacteria. It's amazing how our immune systems work. But how do those antibodies even reach the methanogens? They're deep inside the cow's digestive system, right?
Good question. It's all about the delivery system. The cow's saliva, now armed with these antibodies, acts as a vehicle, carrying them directly into the rumen, the primary site of methane production.
Wow. So the antibodies are delivered straight to the source. That's impressive. But once they're in the rumen, do the antibodies just completely wipe out all the methanogens?
Not exactly. It's a little more involved than that. Remember, the goal isn't to completely eliminate all methanogens, but rather to control their population and minimize their activity. The antibodies bind to the methanogens, which prevents them from producing methane as efficiently as they normally would. It's about bringing balance to the rumen's ecosystem.
So they're more like disarming the methanogens rather than completely destroying them.
Exactly. And remember how we talked about methane production, using energy the cow could be using for itself? Well, reducing those active methanogens means the cow gets more of that energy.
So less methane A&D, potentially healthier, more productive cows. That's brilliant. It's a win-win situation.
Precisely. It's a perfect example of how smart, innovative solutions can benefit both the environment and the agricultural industry.
This is truly groundbreaking, but as we've already discussed, it's a complex issue. I'm assuming there are still hurdles ArkeaBio needs to clear before this vaccine is widely available. What are some of the challenges they're facing in bringing this groundbreaking vaccine to market?
Well, just like with any new technology, there are regulatory hoops to jump through, especially in the agricultural industry. They have to demonstrate that this vaccine is safe, effective, and won't end up harming the environment or people.
So before the break, you were about to tell us about some of these other incredible innovations happening in sustainable food production. What else is out there?
Well, get this. Some companies are actually using artificial intelligence to design, optimized feed for livestock.
Wait, AI for cow food? How does that even work?
It's pretty wild. These AI systems can look at a ton of data about different feed ingredients, the nutritional needs of the animals, even local climate and environmental conditions, and they use all that information to come up with these super personalized feed blends that could help with digestion and reduce those methane emissions.
So we could have, like, AI nutritionists for livestock. The future is wild. What else? You mentioned there are even more innovations.
There is. What if we could grow meat in a lab?
Okay, now that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
I know, right? But it's a field that's getting a lot of attention. Cultivated meat, as it's sometimes called, basically takes cells from an animal and grows them in a controlled environment to make real meat, but without needing traditional animal agriculture.
So no more factory farms. That would be huge for the animals and the planet.
Exactly. And we can't forget about vertical farming either. Imagine skyscrapers filled with crops, growing all year round, no matter the weather, and using way less land and water.
That's like something out of Star Trek, but for food. It really seems like we're on the edge of a revolution in how we produce food.
I think so too. This deep dive into ArkeaBio and their vaccine has given us a really cool look at one possible solution, but it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. We're seeing so much creativity and innovation in food and agriculture technology.
It's actually really inspiring. It gives you hope that even with all the problems we're facing, there's still potential for positive change. Who knew we'd be talking about vaccines for cow burps and AI-designed cow food?
It just shows that sometimes the most unexpected ideas can make the biggest difference. It's about being open to new ways of thinking, challenging the way things have always been done, and being willing to try new things.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive. I feel like I learned so much about something I never even thought about before. It really makes you wonder what other unconventional solutions are out there waiting to be discovered.
That's what I love about science and innovation. There's always something new to learn. Who knows, maybe one day we'll look back at this conversation and realize that vaccines for cow burps were just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. If you want to learn more about what we discussed today or learn more about these incredible innovations we talked about, you can head over to our website. We'll have links to the research we discussed and some bonus material on those other technologies shaping the future of food. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay curious.